Welcome to Coast View from right here on the beautiful Mississippi Gulf Coast from the studio here on the coast. I want to welcome you to Coast View, to show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi, and Mississippi for that matter, a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, we've got a really special show today. Let me kind of set it up a little bit. I've had, as you know, a great career in media. And during the latter part of my career, was able to lead some of the more significant digital media efforts for newspaper and really online content companies, and was able to work very closely with Advanced Condé Nast, the largest privately owned media company in the United States. So when I left the Sun Herald, went over to Alabama for a short period of time and then to New Orleans, and was really involved in some really groundbreaking stuff. Of course, throughout that time, I watched the evolution of technology in this country. So you've seen a big switch from where we used to just have telephones to when the internet became part of the name of the game, and we've had a lot of discussions about whether the internet should be free or not, and how does America stay competitive really at the end of the day as you think about the advancements in technology? We've seen, I mean, just if you go back and think about the iPhone, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone in 2007. Just think about what has happened since then. And what's happened with companies like Google and Amazon and Facebook and Twitter and Netflix and all these incredible content companies. You think about what's happened with broadband, and I've repeatedly said, incidentally, that broadband in Mississippi, giving Mississippi access, may be one of the most significant economic development things we could do, unleashing the minds and the hearts of Mississippians across the state. What's happening in that domain today is one of the most important things that ever happened in our state's history, probably, at least from an economic development point of view. We've got new competitors all over this world. We've been in a global economy for an awful long time, but if you think about where America is in terms of technology innovation, what's happening in China today as it relates to technology innovation, we are in a battle. And I couldn't think of a better person to have a conversation about sort of the evolving situation as it relates to technology, where America stands, where Mississippi stands in that context, than with my old friend Chip Pickering, who used to be he was a U.S. representative for the 3rd District, and now he runs an association that started back like over 40 years ago now. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of that association and what it's all about, and we'll talk about more. So anyway, Chip Pickering, the CEO of INCOMPAS, welcome to Coast View, my friend.
Ricky, it's great to be with you. And as we caught up before the show, and just a lot of great memories of your work in the newspaper business, being a very thoughtful community leader and advocate for the coast. And so it's very good to be with you today, and I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, it's good. Hey, listen, I would be remiss if I didn't say one important thing. Our old friend, my old boss at Mississippi Power, back as a young guy, I worked there for a short period of time. I had the pleasure of working for Bobby Nichols, and he had a profound impact on my life. My father died during the time that I worked for him, and he really encouraged me to. I had been in pre-med for a while, and then I was trying to decide what I wanted to do. He really encouraged me to move on with my college career. I changed my major, went on to get an MBA, did an internship at the Sun Herald, and the rest is history. But during that time that I was working for Bobby, I had the opportunity to meet your father, Charles Pickering, and former judge and incredibly important leader in this state. I mean, the history of your family in the state is very significant. How's your father doing these days?
You know, he's doing extremely well. He's 84 years old, and he's recruiting my 5 sons and I to come plant 4,000 trees in Jones County next week. So still very active and still pushing to get things done. And so
he's always making an impact. Was always something that kind of came natural to him, isn't it?
It is. I think the tremendous work ethic of his generation, and for him and his family, and then to go to Ole Miss, go to law school, eventually enter into Mississippi politics, a leading pioneer in the Mississippi Republican Party, and then his judicial career. You know, for a while he lived part-time on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and presided in the court down on the coast, and then in Hattiesburg. So he has many great friendships and relationships. Bobby Nichols, you mentioned, such a good, decent, loving man. Just
Yeah.
he's been very good to my family. And in fact, my mother and my sisters went up to visit the Nichols not too long ago.
Really? Really?
Had a
That's
great,
awesome. Well,
yeah.
I know that he and his wife listen to Coast View on a regular basis, and they send notes all the time. I'm so proud of you, Ricky. Blah blah blah. I mean, he really pays close attention, and I think it's great that I had the opportunity in this latter part of my life to sort of look back at people like Roland Weeks, the former publisher of the Sun Herald, and George Schlegel, and a growing list of others that
Yes.
have influenced me over the year, including Bobby Nichols, and say thanks to them and lead by example, the example that they provided to me and the opportunity I have now to give back using what they have taught me about what it means to be a community leader. And it means the world to me to have this opportunity. I know you feel the same way. You've been think of the mentors and the people that you've had been in contact with throughout your career. It's incredible, really, the influences on you, isn't it?
It really is. And between my father, Haley Barber, who helped run his first statewide campaign for U.S. Senate in 1978, as they helped build the Republican Party in the 70s. As you know, I was a staffer for Senator Trent Lott, another son of the coast. But just for him to rise both in the House leadership, then Senate leadership, and to be on his staff, during the 1990s, which I would call the most productive legislative period since the New Deal.
Yeah.
When two Southerners, Bill Clinton and Trent Lott, had a chance to make deal after deal after deal that reformed our telecommunications, our technology sector, but also our financial, our trade, our agriculture, our welfare. Every New Deal policy was transformed during that decade of the 90s, with Senator Lott at the leadership position in the Senate. What he did for our national security, for defense, for the coast, for shipbuilding, for NASA, for our space policy, for our research institutions and universities. And to be a part of that team, both as a member of Congress and from his staff, it was just a great time. Senator Cochran in his leadership position. Mississippi had the best team in the nation politically. Haley Barber was the head of the RNC. We were able to get a lot done for the state and to lay out and build up the key institutions and infrastructure from the coast all the way up to North Mississippi. Really transform our economy from a low-wage, low-skill manufacturing to high-skill, high-wage, advanced manufacturing sectors, automotive, defense, aerospace. So I'm very thankful that I got to work with great mentors and leaders and to be a part of the Mississippi leadership team during that time.
You're right. And boy, did that not, I think that's probably the best example of that leadership sort of bearing out was after Katrina. And, I didn't fully appreciate, I was publisher of the Sun Herald. I worked with Haley to form the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal. Was honored to have the opportunity to write the foreword to his book. But it wasn't until, working with Jerry Nash and getting to read some of the chapters as it was unfolding that I understood what really was happening with Haley. He would spend time on the coast, but then he would go to Washington, and he was spending all that time in Washington working with across the aisle to create a bipartisan support of Mississippi. And of course, Thad Cochran was in a perfect position. I mean, I had a terrific relationship with him. What a statesman he was. And then locally, I mean, you think about inside the state, when Democrats like Billy McCoy at the time, the Speaker of the House, and what he did to focus on helping bring, game was not for gaming, but he supported and helped kind of move along this whole notion of creating inland gaming so that we could recover. But man, I miss those days, and I was talking just the other day about changes in the flood insurance program in the United States and the impact it's going to have in coastal communities, especially coastal communities like like coastal Mississippi. And within the political framework that exists today, and we'll get to specific issue that you're concerned about these days about making sure America stays competitive from a technology point of view. But you think about trying to get attention to something like flood insurance with all the noise in Washington these days. It's a different place than it was back in those days. In just a relatively short period of time, it turned a corner to this incredibly polarized place. That has to make you kind of crazy, doesn't it?
It grieves me, to be honest, having lived through the 90s and the early 2000s when we had such a great bipartisan period of legislative productivity.
Let's do this, Chip. This is actually a good segue. When we come back on the other side, we'll talk about the evolution from what it was, the ability to actually come together on some issues to this sort of divided world we live in today, and how difficult that can be to get issues through the process. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Chip Pickering. See you after this break. Welcome back to Coast View. I have an old friend, Chip Pickering, who's former congressman and now runs an incredibly important association that represents a large number of not just content providers, but particular technology companies these days. And we're going to evolve into a discussion about some legislation that is being considered today and why it's important for us not to take the eye off the ball to what we need to do just in general to make sure that America stays competitive. And we'll come back to that in just a second. But when we went to break, we were reflecting for a second. And I remembered during the break that one of the things that I saw today was a YouTube video of a C-SPAN segment. And it was, I think it was like 14 years ago. You were in Congress, and even then, by the way, you had the FCC, and you were talking to them. You were talking about broadband then. I don't even know that back in those days we really appreciated what that meant. But you were. What was interesting, Chip, about this is that you had a very significant question around process and outcomes and strategic focus, and whether the various commissioners of the FCC were really driving toward the same goal. I was very impressed with the question. But what I noticed most about the environment was there was camaraderie. There was respect for one another, and too often that's missing today. And you were saying before we went to the break that you miss it, and that you might even shed a tear over it because it's tough to look at the situation today compared to what it used to be.
And as you know, I'm a Republican, but I would probably define myself first as an institutionalist, and the institutions of our Congress, the executive branch. My father was in the judicial branch, and I want those institutions to be credible, to be trusted, to function, and to get things done that need to be done, not to be failed institutions where a great majority of Americans have lost confidence and lost trust in those institutions. And for the last decade to 2 decades, we've had a decline in those institutions functioning at capacity. This has happened at other times in American history. The question is, how do we restore the trust, the confidence of the American people in those key governing institutions, and make it work for communities across the coast, across Mississippi, across the country, so that rural America and urban America both feel like they're being represented, they're being heard, that whether it is infrastructure, critical new infrastructure like broadband, whether it is an economy that is thriving and prosperous, a healthcare system that works, an educational system that competes globally and prepares all of our children in a way that they can compete in STEM-related areas, which the future will dictate. And we have a great foundation from which to work. We may have lost our way as we have in other periods of American history, but I'm hopeful that we can see a restoration of good leadership, good functioning institutions in Congress and with the executive branch. But it is tough. Super PACs, the loss of a functioning appropriations process, social, and I represent a lot of the social media companies, but social media creates a challenge in the political world of being able to bring people together in a way that is healthy. So lots of challenges, but we faced them before and we can overcome them.
Well, this I mentioned that Encompass has been around for like I think more than 40 years. It was started
Yeah,
around
we
19.
just celebrated our 40th anniversary this year.
There you go. There you go.
We started in 1981.
Yeah. So the math is right. And you started, back in the day of old time telephones and what needed to happen to make it more competitive. And then look where you are today. What a transformation.
We were the founding voice for competition in telecommunications in the old telephone industry. So as Ma Bell was being broken up, we were advocating for the Department of Justice and in Congress and across the country to let competition come to the long distance market. And many of your listeners may not, or our viewers may not even remember, there used to be such a thing called long distance. We're old enough that we do. I teach a class at Ole Miss. They were all born around 2000 to 2003. And I tried to explain to them what long distance was. And I could see this blank stare that, they weren't sure what that meant, but we were the first advocate for competition. And because it was so successful, and we went from copper networks and analog networks and no competition and high prices and poor service to a very vibrant long distance industry. And one of the leaders of the industry was headquartered in Mississippi, WorldCom. And they rose to become the largest internet backbone company in the world. They were second in the long distance industry, really helped shape that era. And they went from copper networks to fiber and digital. And it was the first step of the digital revolution, the digital age, and all that is brought. And because it was so successful, we then had the Cable Act of 1992, which brought competition to cable and to satellite, and those networks transformed from analog to digital. And then we had the cable modem. And then you had both the last mile and the long distance networks that gave us the new digital infrastructure we needed for the internet and information age. And when I was working for Stern Lott, we did the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which brought competition across all communication sectors and industries. And part of that also laid the foundation for the internet that gave the internet platforms the ability to have protection from lawsuits and liability so that they could post people's thoughts and views and websites and business and religious and political expression and content. And the commercial internet was born out of that act. And I tell people, I kind of feel like Forrest Gump. I've run past every major historically significant telecom, internet policy occurrence. I was a freshman member of Congress in 1997. I thought I was exiled to the Science Committee because I wanted to be on the Commerce Committee and to do the work that I've been doing as a staffer. Fate had it. I was the vice chairman of the Basic Research Committee, which had the jurisdiction over the internet. And the congressman who was the chair unfortunately passed away with cancer, and I became the chairman of that subcommittee. And it was the time that we were establishing all the domain names and registries, so the .org, the .edu, the .com, and the multi-stakeholder governance of how a commercial internet would work, and the negotiations with the Clinton administration and White House on how do we go from a government-run research network with our universities and the Department of Defense to a commercial internet. And I had no way of even imagining what would happen as a result of being a part of that policy process and those negotiations and the 96 Act. And so, and Mississippi has played a really critical role. I mentioned WorldCom. Comcast was started in Tupelo, Mississippi, and then in Laurel, Mississippi. My dad was their first attorney. SkyTel, I don't know if y'all remember SkyTel, the first two-way pager system, which happens to be what is now texting. So the birth of texting came in Mississippi. So we really have a rich history. in shaping the modern telecommunication technology and internet. Jim Barksdale was the CEO of Netscape, the first commercial browser, internet browser. So Mississippi has played an outsized role in the development of the digital age, the information age, and the policies that founded and framed it.
It's very significant, and I get the Forrest Gump thing that you were there just about every step of the way. You know, it's interesting now that you find yourself as the CEO of INCOMPAS, an association representing so many important companies. But you know, we are where we are. We are where we are, and that is, you know, the system is the system we had to work with, and you just got to stay focused, and you got to make sure people are educated, and we got to make sure that legislation doesn't result that ultimately affects the United States ability to maintain its technological edge. And there are threats on the horizon as it relates to that, aren't there?
There are, and as China has a major initiative called the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're really focusing all of their government resources and funding and all of the capital investment that they can around critical sectors that they think will give them a technological edge and advantage over the U.S., both in the military realm as well as the commercial. I see that we need to get a break.
Yeah, so what we'll do, I think China is a great place to start. And we may, if we're not careful, we may put some encumbrances on America's ability to be technologically competitive while China goes and does their thing without any kind of encumbrances on them at all. And this is very significant when you start to look at the rankings of the companies that are emerging from China compared to America. It's a serious deal, and we really need to focus on it. When we come back, we'll talk about what that evolution and what Congress is thinking about these days. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast View. We have Chip Pickering with us, and we're talking about, we're actually moving to the part of the conversation where there's some concern about Congress and action that could be taken that could affect America's competitiveness. And you mentioned China as we were going to the break, and we won't get into big, long discussions about what's happening with Taiwan and other movements that are happening militarily for China, what's happening technologically, what's happening just in general, the supply chain and issues we face there, and raw materials that are necessary for technology. Man, we could spend the next several hours talking about the dependency that exists and the competitiveness that exists and the threat that exists as it relates to China. We could oversimplify by just talking about China, though, because China is not standing alone in its competitive sort of nature relative to America. Every country in the world is trying to compete technologically, and we never know where that next pocket of excellence might be. So, you know, it's a global technological environment, a global technological competitive situation that we face today. And any moves by Congress in Washington to affect our abilities to compete on a worldwide stage is an incredibly important conversation. And this is where Chip spends an enormous amount of his time these days. Tell me why that is important.
Well, let me start it off in two things. One thing Congress is doing right is that it just passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill, which contains $65 billion to build out broadband networks to every American and every place and every community, whether rural or urban. And so it's a historic level of investment that's coming at a critical strategic time for America, coming out of a pandemic, learning all the lessons out of COVID, of how important connectivity is, whether it is for school, for healthcare, for small businesses to large. That connectivity and the capacity to be able to do what we're doing right now virtually. And businesses are doing this, and schools are doing this, and hospitals are doing this. And so very rapidly, our network capacity, speed, all of those things are critical to America's not only competitiveness, its economy, but fundamentally to our national security. 20 years ago, we did not know that China, whether it would go as a more open economy and then what we hoped would be a more open political system. and a more democratic political system. We now know that they will be hostile to democratic norms. We've seen what they've done in Hong Kong. We know what they're doing in human rights and human freedom. They are looking strategically, not only to compete with us economically, but to have the largest military carrier fleet capacity dominance in the Pacific. We now know for sure that China will be hostile to our interest and hostile to our value system. And they're pouring enormous resources and building the networks that then allow the advanced applications that will drive and determine the future. And by advanced applications, what do I mean? So artificial intelligence, quantum computing, autonomous vehicles, precision agriculture, advanced robotic manufacturing, telemedicine. Every sector will be driven by the network enabling these advanced applications. And whoever wins the race to the best network, the best 5G network, the best fiber networks, the best digital infrastructure, will then win the race to the best applications. And so we're doing something significant in the infrastructure bill and funding this deployment of all the new networks, much like we did in the Great Depression to bring electricity to every home and to every business. So this is historic, it's transformational, it's significant, it's strategic. That's a good step. But on the other hand, we have these initiatives in Congress that are trying to limit the ability of our leading tech companies. And I represent the companies like Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Amazon and others that are building the digital infrastructure, the data centers, who are really investing enormous amounts in the artificial intelligence and quantum computing that then allows us to build out advanced distribution systems like we have in Madison, Mississippi with Amazon. It's one of the leading robotic distribution centers, while at the same time employing over 1,000 people in high-tech, high-paying jobs. Much like Nissan came and transformed our economy on the automotive side, Amazon and then is transforming how we will do distribution in the future. And then you combine that with Mississippi's leadership in drone and UAV, air-based UAV, and from FedEx in North Mississippi and Memphis to the Duff Brothers in Columbia, Mississippi with KLM, we could have the most advanced trucking distribution and autonomous vehicle system right in the center of the South, which can get into all of the fastest growing markets. So not only is this a strategic time for Americans' interests, it's a very critical time for Mississippi. We have supercomputing, high performance computing capability on the coast at NASA at Stennis, at Southern Miss, at Ole Miss and State, and at Jackson State, and at the Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg. If most people don't know this, Mississippi has more fiber than any state in the region, which is the advanced network. If we connect to our computational centers and our research centers, we can lead the region in 5G deployment on the wireless side, on fiber deployments, on computational capability. We can make our aerospace, automotive, and distribution and transportation systems the most advanced in the region. Mm-hmm. If we have the right leadership and the right vision to execute it. And so Mississippi will see probably $500 million coming into our state to build out the broadband networks. And not only does it do those critical sectors that I just outlined, but what does that do for a small business person in Pascagoula, Mississippi, or in Pascagoula, or in Biloxi? In my hometown, a show has really transformed and given new life to Laurel, Mississippi, called My Hometown. It was discovered on Facebook. And so you just never know, whether it's through social media or through running a small business, using cloud computing capabilities to really have greater efficiency, productivity, lower costs, and better services. And you can do it from anywhere in Mississippi. And so those are the things that I think our leadership of the state, if they can focus on getting that right, similar to how we rebuilt and recovered from Katrina, that it would have a foundational future impact that can give generational change for good. And those
So,
are some of the things
so
that we
Chip,
need
as you
to.
watch what Congress is contemplating today relative to tinkering with monopoly laws in this country, how clear and present a danger is that?
It's very so. Our leading tech companies, which are, we should look at them. We were the birthplace of the internet. Our companies that just started a little over 20 years ago. So Google started in 1998. If you think about that, the other, Facebook started in the early 2000s. They're very young. They're 2 decades old, but they have led the world and all of the advanced applications, and we've won the last decade because of their leadership. As we go into this next critical decade with these new advanced applications that I discussed earlier, will American policy keep them free and unencumbered to compete against China? China now has 4 of the top 10 tech companies. If they become the dominant supplier for 5G networks in Europe and in Africa and Asia, we will be not only at a disadvantage commercially, but we'll be at risk from cybersecurity and critical attacks on our national security capabilities. So we have to win the race to both networks and applications. And if our companies are fighting Washington and fighting antitrust legislation when China is building and growing and expanding and dominating, then we have harmed ourselves at the exact wrong moment in history.
It's not a good situation potentially. To what extent do you think they will succeed in tinkering with the antitrust legislation?
Yeah, they just passed a number of bills out of the Senate and the House committees. It is unclear whether they can get it passed in the remaining time left this year before the midterm elections. Midterm elections hopefully will come and stop these efforts to harm our leading tech companies and put us at a strategic disadvantage in relation to China and China's technology companies and technology investments and networks. So we were within 6 months of either going down a very bad path or stopping that and resetting, hopefully, and reimagining a better way for us to compete globally and to maintain our strategic technology leadership as a nation.
When we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Chip Pickering about how to maintain America's technological edge without some kind of, hopefully there won't be some kind of intervention from Congress. We'll continue the conversation on the other side. Welcome back to Coast View. I have former Congressman Chip Pickering with me today. He's the CEO of an association that represents significant technology and content interest in the United States. They do business worldwide. Obviously, we've had a lot of conversations around potential antitrust action by Congress, which could be incredibly debilitating for the technology industry that's trying to compete globally. And we're as you pointed out before we went to break, we're still infants in this thing going forward. When you think about where robotics is headed and artificial intelligence is headed and data and what we can do with data and computing technology and how fast it's advancing. We're just really, as much as it feels like we're living in this highly advanced place that's really helped us in this sort of remote working and remote medical and remote, the learning world that we're in because of the pandemic. We're still early in the process, and technology development is happening at lightning pace all around the world. And anything that could stop that or slow that down would be incredibly detrimental, not just economically, but could be, just from a defense point of view, just in terms of protecting America, it could be significant, couldn't it?
It really could. And so what I'm hoping is that, and you and I were talking on the break, a lot of the conversations around bias and censorship and privacy and cybersecurity um, the different ways that algorithms may work in someone's feed or in providing information of interest to someone. That is a conversation that needs to be had, and solutions and new standards need to be formed around the internet community and companies. So that's one set of issues that we need to address. Antitrust and competition issues, especially at this point with our rivalry and emerging competition with China, and for the whoever leads both in national security and in value systems and in political systems, and who shapes the future not only for the US but for the rest of the world. That is where I'm very concerned that we could be going down a wrong path, and we need to be very careful not to do so, and to make sure that we get competition issues right. I happen to believe that we have wonderful antitrust laws. We have something called the Consumer Welfare Standard, and that if your prices are going down and investment is going up and innovation is going up, all of which are readily apparent, and the evidence is clear that technology companies are doing all of those things in almost every sector. Well, I wouldn't say almost, in every sector of the economy. That is clear. These other issues that are creating the cultural and political divisions, and just the individual security questions, those need to be addressed. They need to be solved.
Yeah. Well, I thought the way you said that was really good. That, there's this one set of issues here that probably frustrate a lot of the legislators. And then you have another set of issues over here that have to do with maintaining, not doing something that gets in the way of us being able to maintain our global competitiveness. Yeah. That you and I chatted about this during the break, but I came from a digital media world. You've been on the policy and legislation side of the internet, and so much as it relates to technology and telecommunications your entire career. And so you and I are able to have a conversation about it. And I'm cognizant of the reality that a lot of what you and I are talking about, the average person may not fully appreciate. But on the same token, that same thing is true in Washington. It's complicated. This technology is changing so rapidly. If you're not living in the world like you and I did, It's hard for the average person to understand it. And so a staffer or a congressman or a senator might just simply say, I'm so frustrated by all this, we need to do something. Yeah. And they end up acting on the wrong thing. And that would be devastating to America if we enable that to happen. And I hope that you're able to cut through the noise and get the proper educating done.
And one message that I have, we have a tendency as a people, when there is a crisis or conflict, to overreact. And we can now look probably and say at 9/11, we overreacted in ways that led to 2 decades of war that entangled us and took us away from what we really needed to be focusing on while China emerged as a leader. Mm-hmm. I think most people would say that our COVID reaction, we may have overreacted in many ways and maybe did more harm than good in our overreaction. The tech issues give us that same potential framework, that all of the anger on the bias or censorship issues could lead us to an overreaction that we're going to punish these companies in a way that harms our national interest and our national security and our leadership and the consumer welfare of every American in the country.
Yeah.
And so we need to be wise and do one thing right and not to do one thing wrong.
That's well said. And listen, thanks for visiting with us today. What we'll do is we'll schedule you next month or so to come back. And I just want to talk about Mississippi and the opportunities we have.
I would love to do that. I teach a class at Ole Miss. I'm part of a foundation in Jackson called the Great City Foundation. How do we make a great capital city? Because to be a great state, you have to have a great city.
Yeah, the notion of the potential for a Silicon Delta, and what that might mean, and the emergence of the new economy and all that. I look forward to having a chat with you about that.
We have all the elements to lead our region.
We do. Yes. Anyway, this has been Chet Pickering, a Mississippian that's given his heart and soul to this state and this nation. It's been a pleasure to visit with you today, my friend.
I've enjoyed greatly. Thanks.
You bet. Take care.